This episode is brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe. Hello there, Tando Book Club lovers. This season, we're going on a deep dive with some of Africa's female thought leaders. Joining me today as our guest for a 3-episode special in this series is Barbara Nyangairi. Barbara Nyangairi is the Executive Director of the Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. She holds a Master's in Forced Migration, BSc in Public Administration, and Diploma in Education. Barbara has written and conducted research on deaf education, access to health for the deaf, and sign language. Barbara has a keen interest in the empowerment of the deaf and hard of hearing. She has experience in human rights, democracy, governance, elections, gender, and education. Thriving as a Stepmother, Equipped for Success is her first book. As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of our book discussion. Naturally, we've chosen a quote from Barbara's book. Many times I have found the language or terminology that society uses to describe my situation does not honor my family's experience or our commitment to thriving. For instance, I've never called my boys stepsons, so even in this book, I refer to them as my boys. Yet society is always ready to put us in a box. A stepmother is not viewed as a real mom and can easily be labeled interloper, intruder, and in extremes, the witch, otherwise known as the wicked stepmother. Her existence is shrouded in illegitimacy, and so the children that she raises day in and day out are not her real children, and the assumption is that they are the victims of her cruel reign of terror. After all, it is always easier to demonize what we do not understand than to make the effort to appreciate the challenges, contradictions, and unique situations faced by people whose life experience is different to our own. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Selina.
It's such a pleasure to have you to the book club.
Thank you for having me. I hope we're going to have lovely conversations.
Yes, they're going to be deep conversations. So, Barbara, in your book, you start off citing some very disturbing statistics. And they're to do with the rising divorce rates and also the instances of remarriage. And I quote, research on blended families conducted by Smart Step Families in the United States of America has shown that blended families face higher risks of divorce than first marriages, and the prevalence increases with each remarriage. For instance, third or fourth time remarrying. 50% of first marriages end in divorce. 75% of divorced persons remarry. 67% of second marriages end in divorce. 74% of third marriages end in divorce. 65% of remarriages involve children from previous marriages and form a blended family. And more than 40% of most marriages are blended families. So 40% is quite high.
It is very, very high,
Yeah.
and quite disturbing, but it's becoming the norm.
It is becoming
even
the
in
norm.
Zimbabwe.
Yes. And actually, in your book, you offset these statistics by talking about how you were actually listening to a radio news alert where one of the headlines was around the rising rate of divorce in Zimbabwe.
Absolutely. And people who had been married less than a year were divorcing. And in that month alone, over 1,000 couples had separated.
Wow.
And we're talking about the formal registrations. We're not talking about those that are not, formally registered, as it were. And I think it's something that we need to think about. One of the things that I've thought about is that no one trains us about marriage. We have trained for our careers. Imagine ECDA now, up to grade 7, Form 1 to Form 6. You do your college degree, diploma, whatever qualification. We train for work, but we don't train for marriage. We don't train for parenting. Yet those are the things that keep, they're pillars of society. So I don't know whether we need to establish a school of marriage.
Yeah, but definitely. I mean, you're so right. We do spend most of our lives training for the world of work. and very little intentional training for marriage. Why was it so important for you to start making your case from this background of the divorce statistics and the high rates of remarriage?
As a divorcee myself, I was very little prepared for my first marriage, and I was not prepared either for my second marriage. And the confusion, the lack of clarity, how do we make this work? And thinking that I don't want to divorce a second time. And it is that caused me to think, no, there have to be some resources somewhere to help me as a stepmom, to help me to be able to, manage this world of blending, because it's different in the African setting. Firstly, you're looking at remarriage. I mean, you failed the first marriage. That's it. It's failure. And then you get into a second marriage. Do you want to fail again? Or do you want to begin to think about what will make it work this time?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was very brave of you, because some of us would just be hiding.
It's good to hide, but it takes two. It takes two to make any marriage successful. And in blended families, it takes more than two. It takes everyone, it takes the whole family to make it work now.
Definitely. So we as society are really uncomfortable with the idea of celebrating and embracing remarriage. So we're great with the first marriage. We'll come with the gifts, we will prepare the kitchen teas and whatever else needs to happen. And, we'll post and we'll talk about it. But it's very different for when we have to celebrate people in our families and our friendship groups, our peers, people at work who are now going on their remarriage. We find it a little bit harder to come to those platforms with the same open heart and the same celebration. Why do you think we find it so awkward to celebrate remarriage?
I think it's cultural. We find men remarrying more acceptable than women remarrying. I mean, like anyone will tell you, I mean, like, so we are more kinder to men marrying again and finding love again than to women. And I think we are fearful. It goes back to, so we usually blame the women for marriages that didn't work. She didn't cook well, she wasn't taking care of her husband. There is something that you could have done, that made it not work. So why do you think now it will work? And so society is like, but you can live by yourself. Like, why are you not living alone? I mean, you have children, take care of your children. It's like a burden to be remarried. So those are some of the sentiments that you come across if you are remarrying, but it's more acceptable for men. So it's almost like women, when they get into a second marriage, the men, they're becoming the caregiver, providing support, and it's acceptable for men than for women.
Definitely. And I think one of the other aspects is, and you mentioned this in your book, is that it's also difficult to celebrate remarriage because you have to accept that something didn't go right the first time. So it's almost like you're celebrating on the back of someone's failure or someone else's loss, especially if one of the parties remarrying, their ex-spouse has not remarried. So it's kind of like, oh, we left that person there and, we've left them behind, which is very, very interesting. But is that actually helping our friends who are remarrying? Are we setting them up for success by stigmatizing them that way and approaching their relationships in that way?
Not necessarily, but you need to understand that marriage, remarriage, all these are very emotional spaces, very emotional issues. Like you say, it's happiness at the backhand of a loss. So you're looking at somebody remarrying after their wife has passed on. The children are still grieving, possibly, and they're thinking, okay, so you've moved on. But obviously you can't replace a mother, and they're gone, and the husband can move on, or the wife can move on. It's the emotional undertones that are associated with remarriage. The children are also thinking, it means it's final now. It means that my parents are not coming back together, because already the fact that you are remarrying means it puts to finality any hope working things out between
Yeah.
you and the ex-spouse.
Definitely, because I mean, it would just be messy if you were like, okay, I'm going to remarry, and then you're like, oh, let me go back to that first one. It's untidy, to put it very euphemistically. So the statistics we chatted about earlier indicate that remarriage is actually harder than the first time of marriage. So like it's like the divorce rate is still sitting averaging at around 50, but then remarriage, that rate is even higher, and like it's a little bit of a challenge. Why do you think second time marriages, remarriages, are so fragile?
You've already said it. They are at the backseat of a loss. Loss that has come as a result of divorce, loss that has come as a result of death. And with that brings a lot of brokenness. So both parties that come into any union the second time have a level of brokenness within them. But the children also, if they're bringing in children, if both parties bring in children, the children are also broken by the loss. And it's those challenges with acceptance. How do you respond to the grief? Because, for example, on your wedding day, you are very happy you're being married, but the husband's children are not happy at all. They would rather be not there. And if they're there, they're thinking about their mother who is gone or who has been divorced. So it's really a very emotional space. And how do we validate the feelings of the various parties who have lost, and how do we help them to embrace our happiness as not adding to their loss,
Yeah.
but also adding to their life and the value of life.
Yeah.
So it's like a delicate balance. It's like you're walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
And so the things that make it harder are the past, the baggage, the memories. Like, should the child be happy that their father is getting married again?
Yeah. So a lot of unfinished business that is potentially unresolved. So if remarriage is so hard, why bother doing it? Is there even a right way to do it? And things like, when is even the right time to remarry?
Human beings are very hopeful, Selina. We want to try again. If we have failed, if we think that, life has dealt us a blow, like death, you heal and you want to give it a go again. The right time, I think it's good to give it time. But there is never a time. I've heard very few cases where children have suggested to their parents that, I think it's time you remarry. Very few instances. But in most cases, it's about you giving the children, the parties involved, enough time to settle, to heal, and then to move on to the next relationship. We have had situations where somebody remarries 6 months after the death of their wife.
Yeah.
It can bring a lot of challenges with the children and other parties to that union, not knowing whether this relationship was subsisting before the other person passed on.
Yeah.
They've
Too
not
many
had
questions,
time to settle. The children have not, healed to the point that they can then accept another person in their parents' life.
So, Barbara, how can those of us who surround and desire to support couples facing remarriage do better?
I think there are many ways in which we can support, but one of the ways is to set couples who are remarrying for success. So, for example, allow time for the family to settle, allow time for the family to find their feet before you come in to proffer support, advice, or judgment. Allow them to really settle in their own routine, find their own feet, so that they're then better able to navigate. And when they reach out for support, it's sometimes it's not to get your advice, but it's to vent. It's to just process their feelings, to tell you what is happening in the union, what is happening with the family that they don't understand, and they want to process those thoughts with you. So sometimes it's just the gift of silence to really allow them to speak out, to allow them to share without judging.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it must be very hard because you speak about this in the book, a wedding day with an instant family. So your wedding photo, it's you, your husband, and like
5
full-grown children. Whereas, you know, in a first marriage, you have the grace to discover one by one. You learn your husband, you learn your first child over time, and then you grow together.
Absolutely.
So the give and take has a whole lot more grace. So what is a blended family, and why is it not a one size fits all deal?
A blended family is a union where one or both partners come in with children from a previous marriage relationship, and at times they are of different ages. Sometimes it's people bringing in young children, teenage children, and adult children. Blended families are not a one size fits all. The reason for blending is always different. It could be divorce, it could be death, it could be that they never married, but they have had a child, you know, outside of marriage. So there are many ways that people blend in our culture. Even polygamy creates blended families where a man has 2 wives, and recently a woman had 2 husbands.
Yeah, well, I mean, more power to her. That's going to take a lot of effort, managing 2 husbands, let alone men managing many wives. So in the book, you talk about great expectations that cause a crisis of expectation for new stepmothers in particular, when they get started off in a blended family. And I've got a couple here I'd like you to unpack. The first one is the great expectation the stepmother is facing of, we're just going to be one big happy family. What's the pitfall there?
It's the naivety of thinking that you will be able to erase all the history, all the experiences, all the memories, and create one big loving family. I think many stepmoms come into the fray with a lot of hope, with a lot of expectations, and sometimes how children relate to you outside of marriage is different from how they relate to you when you are now their father's wife. And many are shocked by that, but the child liked me, but they liked me before. But now you're a permanent feature. So they are processing it differently than when you were just dating their mom or their dad.
Yeah. So that leads me to the next one, which is the biological parent might be thinking, my spouse, my partner will love my child the way that I will.
It also happens because we have great expectations, like you said, and we would like things to work out better. And who wouldn't love your children when you love them yourself? And so you're thinking that everyone must just love them, but you do not understand that when your spouse looks at your child, they invoke memories of your relationship with their mother or with their father. And that also has to be processed, you know, to say, okay, so what does this mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's better when they are late because they are not there. But when they are there, they are present and they are a constant feature in your union. This child is a reminder that once upon a time, you had someone that you loved.
Yeah, definitely. And then the third one is the child themselves, who's got their own expectations, and maybe they're thinking it's only a matter of time before mom and dad get back together.
Every child, especially a child of divorce, always hopes that their parents will come back together. It's unsaid, it's unspoken, but it's there. Deep down, they would like, there are few children that say, no, our parents were good apart. I mean, like, it's okay. It's okay. They should be far from each other. It's better that way. But many, many children have hope that their parents will come back together. It was just a minor, misunderstanding. It's something that can be solved. But your marriage now makes it very permanent. It shows that there's no hope of that. And with that comes broken expectations. With that comes pain. Even sometimes rehashing the pain of the divorce comes again with your marriage. So there are many triggers for grief, particularly for children. And if a stepmom or a stepdad is not alive to those emotions and how their marriage can actually be a trigger for pain, then they don't understand why this child is behaving the way they're behaving.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, looking at all of those different expectations, if that's all happening internally in one family,
absolutely,
I can imagine now
it is
the process
very
of
chaotic.
blending. Very chaotic. So, on that point, in your book, you very early on use cooking methods as an analogy to describe how people can work through these kinds of frictions, and sort of navigate like the chafing between these great expectations and the crisis that then comes up when they're not met. And you really break them down for us and tell us what the strengths and weaknesses are. So you've got the blending method, chopping up everything and blending it. You've got the pressure cooker method. You've got the microwave method, and you've got the slow cooker method. Take us briefly through these and let us know which method should we really be aiming to go for.
It comes back to the expectations that we have when we marry, and the desire to build one big happy family. And so you will find that when you use the blender, you don't want to talk about the past. You don't want to engage with the past. No matter what it is, could it be death? You want all those memories, out. We want to create this family, and it has to work. So you know what a blender does? It's high speed. It doesn't provide for, and it blends so that there is no memory. If you take a blender and you put oranges, apples, yogurt, by the time you finish, there is no resemblance of what could have been put there, And so that method is very, very dangerous because people want to process naturally. People want to understand what is going on. People want to see where do I fit into this family. And while they may resist at first, but if we use the blender method, we're not allowing them the time to heal, the time to process even those negative emotions. And many stepmoms and stepdads take it personal, which is why we want to build a happy family very quickly. And then there is the pressure cooker, same. It's fast and
hot
and very hot. So there you are saying the children don't like me. You've been there for 1 year. That's too early for the children not to like you. They're also studying you. They also want to understand you. They want to understand where you are. They're not safe with you. They're very suspicious of your place in their father or in their mother's life. And it depends on the gender of the children. So for example, girls are usually more difficult to deal with when you come into their father's life. But girls are usually even like that in their biological families, even for a mother and a father who are not even, like biological. Girls would almost, in most cases, be on their dad's side. They look out for their father. They want to see. So when you come in as a stepmom without that knowledge, you just think that they don't like me and they're competing. So when they go to their father and ask for money for the salon, you think it's a threat. They should have come to you to ask. No. But even if you were the biological mom, they may not have come to you to ask for those things. They would have gone to their dad. So it's understanding that and removing the heat. The microwave is the same. Very quickly, we want to build this family. We want to be all united. We want to be together. It doesn't work like that. It's the slow cooker. Time, low heat. And low heat means that the adults in those families, the stepmom, you don't have to take offense very quickly. You begin to think about what could have caused this reaction and how do I respond in a way that builds and understanding that you are the adult and this is the child. No matter, even if they're the adult child, they're an adult, but they're still a child. In that family, they're still trying to process things. And so low, as the language says in these days, low heat, low expectations. Take each day as it comes. So that will work.
Yeah, so low and slow. We really, really like that. And all of these strategies, ideas, you did quite an extensive study to come up and identify and surface these methods. Who were some of the people that you looked into to get advice like this from, to study these different, like the cooking methods and all of those? Where were some of the places you went to?
Ron Dill is an expert in blended families in the United States. He's written quite extensively on blended families, and so he's one of the people that I really look up to in terms of what is happening on the scene. How are they researching? They have the advantage of doing so much research on families. I think in Zimbabwe we're just fumbling and finding our way. There's very little research on step families, blended families, or even on the family itself. It's not a subject of interest for us, yet it's very important for the stability of any country.
Definitely. Well, I think your book is definitely a first step in localizing this content for us and bringing it home for us, because you, as much as you studied, Ron Deal wasn't the only people. There were many other sources throughout the book.
Absolutely.
As you studied it, you also then put it in our framework, and you situated it in our locale, in our context, in our African culture, in our African ideas. And, I haven't seen a book speaking so frankly about blended families anyway, and dealing particularly with the stepmother's experience and her role. So well done to you, Barbara, for that. And thank you very much for your hard work. So Barbara, we're coming to sort of the end of our first episode on Thriving as a Stepmother. And we always end every episode of the book club with a reading from the author herself. We like to give the author the last word. So what are you going to read for us at the end of today's episode?
I am going to read on the slow cooker. As we ended with blending and which approach to use in blending. So on page 32, the slow cooker approach in blended families. Experts in blended families have compared the successful bonding and blending process that happens in blended families that thrive as a crock pot or a slow cooker method. Low heat and time will make it work. Blending the family will take patience and low expectations. As a stepmother, learning to keep calm, even in the face of provocation, will make the difference. Provocation is common in blended families, and it often comes from different directions. They are the stepchildren, the ex-wife, the members of the extended family who are watching you. Every little action you do is being weighed on a scale where you will not measure up to the initial expectations.
Thank you, Barbara. And a very nice way to end the episode. Really good advice there. It's been another great edition of the book club as we've talked to Barbara Nyangairi. See you again next week, same time, as we celebrate another fabulous African female author. And until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. Goodbye. This episode was brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe.